is an acrylic painting project. And I thought, to be fair, we should probably spend a class just practicing before we actually start our real project. So some of you have used acrylic paint with our very first collage project, but if you haven't, it's a very thicker paint than watercolor. You don't want to take a whole lot on your palette because it's really hard to put back into the jar uncontaminated at the end. So just take a little, or maybe share a palette with the person sitting next to you. You're going to use very thick, hard bristles. I'll show you which ones they are in class. They are not the watercolor brushes. And a palette knife. Always keep a newspaper underneath your project. It does not wash off the table very easily. And of course, a container of water and paper towel so you can clean your brushes in between mixing. Okay, so this is what your station would look like while you're painting. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is look at how to make a range of colors, much like we did with the pencil in the beginning. You can use any color you wish. In this case, I'm going to use red. So I'm going to use white, black, and red. To make a color lighter, of course, you'd add white, and darker, you would add black. The trick is with white, actually, anytime you mix two colors, you want to always start with a lighter color. So in this case, it'll always be white. I like to push a little bit to one of those blank spaces in my palette and just add a touch of red to get the color that I want. With black, red will be the lighter color. Actually, any color will be the lighter color. So you start with that and add a tiny, tiny little bit of black, because black will totally overpower whatever color you're using. Just kind of mix it in. So on your palette, you're going to have a bunch of colors in the spaces. Once you have that done, I'd like you to make maybe 5 or 6 swatches of hues of red across the top of your sketchbook. The first one can just be white. Again, you can watch, I'm cleaning my brush every time I redip the color back in. So you want to start with the lightest shade of pink you can, much like we did with the value with the pencil. So my pink was a little darker than I wanted it to be, so I went back and I added white on top. And you can mix on your paper as well. You don't have to do it just on the palette. So the word for making a color lighter is tint. Okay, you're adding a tint to a color. Now here you can see 2 of my shades of red were almost identical. So I went back in and added a little more red so that the colors weren't exactly the same. Now I'm moving into the darker shades of red. And a little more black. So this is when you have black added to a color, we call this a shade. The last one is pretty much almost entirely black. Try to have at least 6, because you're going to use these for the next little bit. So going back to when we were practicing with shading pencils, we're going to do the same thing with paint, and really the same things apply. You want to make a 2D circle look like a 3D form. So decide where your light source is going to be. In this case, I'm faking it from the left-hand side. So on the left, I'm adding white and really light shades of red. I'm trying to round it off with my paintbrush, blend it in a little. And then I'm going to add shadows on the right-hand side. You can blend it as much or as little as you wish. Again, this is a practice just so when you actually start your real one, you can kind of have an idea of how this is going to work. And this is just one color. If we have extra time today, I'd love to see you do this with all the colors on the color wheel. And there we go. Now, another thing when you're painting is never use a color straight from the jar. You really want to make your own color. And most people will just stick with 2 because it's kind of easy. I would like to push you to use at least 3. Let's see what you can come up with. You might have a really kind of pukey color like this brown one on the left-hand side, but that might be a really nice rich skin tone. It just makes the colors unique, much richer. It's beautiful colors. And we're gonna leave those, we're gonna make those very flat and come back to those later. We're gonna work on those again when they're dry. Now, the opposite of smoothing out your brush strokes is to leave them very loose and sketchy and thick. Just know it will dry this way as well. So it will dry kind of thick on your canvas. But you can have some beautiful color mixing and just not blend it the entire way. Use the same colors, just leave them side by side. The same effect, but with a different tool, you can use a palette knife. It's like the palette knife feels like you're going to frost a cupcake. You just kind of take a scoop and you smooth it on your paper. I'm going to use the exact same colors I used above, some yellow, blue, and a little white. This does use a lot of paint, so if you're being frugal, this might not be the best way. So as you can see here, I'm sort of just spreading it around, but you can also scrape it off and be left with what's left underneath. So that's just another tool. And yes, know that this will dry crusty on your canvas for sure. Okay, plain colors out of the jar. Black is black, which is fine, but everyone's paintings will look the same. I challenge you to use some of the darker colors, greens, blues, reds, browns. Mix those together and just add a little bit of black, and you're going to end up with a really beautiful, in-depth color, richer color black than you had before. Okay, I'm going to pause this just for a second. So there's a paper mache bottle of glue on the sink, actually on the shelf above the sink. You can use this as a medium to help spread your paint if it's a little thick. Now, most of the paint that you're going to use in class is smooth and will go onto the canvas easily, but some are a little drier, like this dark blue one. So you can use a bit of glue to sort of smooth that on. Try to avoid water. I would rather see you use more paint on your canvas to help blend those together. This is not watercolor, so don't water it down too much. Nice thick paint. You can see that it'll smooth and spread around on your canvas much nicer. I'm going to show you an example of one that's too dry and too rough and scratchy, and it's because the paint is too thin. So remember those flat areas? Well, now we're going to go back in because it's dry and add detail. So this is the beauty of acrylic paint. I'm going to pause this again. Let's say you're painting one day and you totally bomb it. You just let it dry, you come back, and most times you can cover it over completely. White covered up blue. Again, if you have it black and try to cover it with yellow or white, that might not work so well. But for many of the colors, you can come back in the next day and add a different color on top. With the details, we're going to use smaller brushes, and this time you do water down your paint a little more, just so that it spreads on the surface a little easier. Let's say you're finished with these major playing around ideas that I have. Here's a few other things you can do. You can try to mix as many different skin tones as you can. You're going to use yellows and oranges, reds, browns, etc. White, of course. You can try, as I said before, let's mix a range of light and dark with all the colors and see what you get.